It took exactly 15 seconds. 15 seconds for 3 armed men to go from predators to prey. 15 seconds for a quiet woman in the corner to dismantle their arrogance with surgical precision. But that wasn't the shocking part. What happened next would unravel a 30-year conspiracy buried in Desert Storm's sand, expose a presidential candidate's darkest crimes, and reunite a daughter with the father the military told her was dead. Stay until the end and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. March 17th, 2025. Boston, Massachusetts. The thing about coming home from war is that nobody tells you the hardest battle starts when the shooting stops. Major Rachel Morgan understood this truth the moment she stepped off the plane at Logan International 3 weeks ago. 23 days since she'd left the dust and blood of Syria behind. 23 days of trying to remember what normal felt like, what it meant to walk down a street without scanning rooftops to hear a car backfire, without dropping into a combat crouch to sleep, without jerking awake at 300 hours, with her hand reaching for a sidearm that wasn't there. 23 days of failing at all of it. Now, on this cold March evening, Rachel sat in the corner booth of Luigi's Trattoria on Hanover Street, her back to the wall, always to the wall, watching the door. It was a reflex she couldn't shut off. Her therapist at the VA called it hypervigilance. Rachel called it staying alive. The restaurant was exactly the kind of place her mother used to dream about when Rachel was a kid. Red-checked tablecloths, candles flickering in wine bottles wrapped with wicker, and the smell of garlic and fresh basil thick enough to taste. Framed photos covered the walls, mostly veterans in dress uniforms spanning from World War II to Afghanistan. Luigi himself, a stocky man with flour-dusted forearms, was a Marine Corps veteran who'd served in Fallujah. He made it his mission to feed soldiers active or retired, like they were his own children. Rachel picked at her linguine, barely tasting it. Across from her empty seat, her mother's voice echoed in memory. "When you get home, baby, first thing we're doing is getting real Italian food, not that MRE garbage." But her mother hadn't lived to see her come home. The cancer had taken her 8 months ago, while Rachel was embedded with Kurdish forces near Raqqa. She'd gotten the Red Cross message 3 hours too late to say goodbye, even over a satellite phone. By the time she made it back to Boston for the funeral, her mother's favorite dress was already under 6 feet of frozen February ground. Rachel set down her fork, appetite gone. She reached for her water glass instead, ice clinking against the sides, and that's when she noticed him. An older man, maybe late 60s, sitting 3 tables over near the bar. Salt and pepper hair, cut military short shoulders that still carried the rigid set of a man who'd spent decades standing at attention. He wore a simple flannel shirt, but Rachel could see it in the way he held himself, the straight spine, the watchful eyes that tracked every person who entered the restaurant. Retired military. No question. He'd been watching her for the last 10 minutes, his gaze returning to her table again and again, with an expression Rachel couldn't quite read. Not threatening, she'd have already acted, if it was that. No, this was something else. Recognition. Confusion. The man looked like he'd seen a ghost. Rachel met his eyes directly. A silent challenge. "I see you seeing me. State your business or look away." The old man's face changed, realization dawning, followed by something that looked almost like pain. He stood slowly, as if his joints hurt, and started toward her table. Rachel's right hand dropped casually to her lap, fingers finding the familiar grip of the concealed Glock 19 in her waistband holster. Massachusetts might have strict carry laws, but some habits from Syria were too dangerous to break. Better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6, as the saying went. "Excuse me, miss," the man said when he reached her table. His voice was rough-weathered by years of shouting orders over gunfire and helicopter rotors. "I don't mean to intrude on your dinner, but I have to ask, are you related to a man named Jonathan Morgan?" Rachel's hand tightened on the Glock. Her father's name. The father she'd never known, never met, never even seen, except in 3 faded photographs her mother kept in a shoebox under the bed. Captain Jonathan Morgan, United States Army Rangers, missing in action, presumed dead, Desert Storm, February 1991. Rachel had been 2 years old. She had exactly 0 memories of him. "Who's asking?" Rachel's voice came out flat, controlled. The voice she used when extracting information from prisoners. "My name is Colonel Frank Sullivan, retired. I served with your father in the 75th Ranger Regiment." He paused, his eyes scanning her face with an intensity that made Rachel uncomfortable. "You have his eyes. Exactly his eyes. I'd recognize them anywhere." "My father died 34 years ago," Rachel said, her tone making it clear the conversation was over. "That's what they told us too." Frank's voice dropped lower, urgent now. "That's what they told everyone. But I never believed—" The restaurant's front door slammed open with enough force to rattle the framed photos on the walls. Rachel's head snapped toward the sound, her body already shifting into a defensive posture before her conscious mind registered the threat. Her hand stayed on the Glock finger beside the trigger guard, safety off. 3 men entered. No 3 predators entered. Rachel had learned to read threats in the first week of Ranger School, a skill she'd honed through 2 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Syria. These men wore expensive suits. Tom Ford, maybe Brioni, but tailoring couldn't hide what they were. The lead man, 6'2", with a shaved head and a scar through his left eyebrow, moved with the controlled violence of someone who'd hurt people for money. The 2 behind him flanked like trained operators, their eyes sweeping the restaurant in coordinated sectors. But it wasn't security sweeps they were performing. It was target assessment. Luigi looked up from behind the bar, his welcoming smile faltering. "Gentlemen, welcome. Table for 3. We're not here to eat," Scarface said, his Boston accent thick as the marinara sauce. "We're here for Sal Tortorici. Tell him Marcus Calabrese wants his money. Tonight." The restaurant went silent. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. Wine glasses hovered in mid-air. Luigi's face drained of color. "I don't know what you're talking about," Luigi said, but his voice shook. "This is a restaurant. I don't know any—" "You know exactly who we're talking about." The second man, shorter but wider, built like a fire hydrant with anger issues, stepped forward. "Sal owes Mr. Calabrese 200 grand. You're his brother-in-law, so either he's here or you're gonna start making payments." Rachel watched her combat instincts screaming. This wasn't her fight. This was Boston mob business, the kind of thing you walked away from if you wanted to keep breathing. She was a soldier, not a cop. Not her jurisdiction, not her problem. But then her eyes found the young couple at the table nearest the door. College kids, maybe 22, 23. The girl wore a modest blue dress first date, probably somewhere nice. The boy had his parents' credit card anxiety written all over his face. They were frozen, the girl's hand gripping her boyfriend's arm hard enough to leave marks. The third man, lanky with a snake tattoo crawling up his neck, noticed them too. A predator's smile spread across his face. "Well, hello there, sweetheart." Snake Tattoo moved toward their table, his intentions written in every step. "You're a pretty little thing. Why don't you come over here and keep me company while we wait for Sal?" "Please," the girl whispered. "We don't want any trouble." "Nobody asked what you wanted." Snake Tattoo reached for her arm. That's when Rachel stood up. She didn't announce herself, didn't shout a warning. She simply rose from her seat with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent years perfecting economy of motion and walked toward the scene with measured steps. Colonel Sullivan's eyes widened. "Don't," he whispered urgently. "Those are Calabrese's men. They'll kill you." Rachel didn't respond. Her focus had narrowed to tactical assessment, 3 targets, all likely armed positions triangulated across the restaurant's floor space. Scarface near the bar, fire hydrant by the kitchen door, snake tattoo near the couple, 17 feet, 12 feet, 8 feet, respectively from her position. Ceramic tile floor, good traction, but blood would make it slippery. 23 civilian witnesses, including 4 children. Collateral damage, potential high. Rules of engagement: minimize civilian casualties, neutralize threats with minimal force necessary. Time to execute approximately 15 seconds. "Excuse me," Rachel said, her voice carrying the same calm authority she'd used countless times in Syria when walking into hostile situations. "I think you gentlemen should leave." All 3 men turned to look at her. For a moment, they just stared, processing what they were seeing. A woman, 5'8", lean but clearly fit under her simple jeans and black sweater, standing between them and their prey. Then Fire Hydrant started laughing. "Oh, this is rich," he said, elbowing Scarface. "Luigi got himself a girlfriend. A little lady wants to play hero." Little lady. Rachel's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "That's original. Did you workshop that line, or did it just come naturally?" Scarface's face darkened. "You got about 5 seconds to sit your ass back down before you get hurt, sweetheart." Interesting. Rachel shifted her weight, her stance widening slightly, not enough to telegraph intent, but enough to provide stability. "See where I come from when a man threatens violence against civilians, especially women. We call that cowardice. But here you are, 3 grown men terrorizing a restaurant owner and college kids. So I'm giving you gentlemen, and I use that term loosely, one chance to walk out that door with your dignity intact." Dignity. Snake Tattoo released the girl's arm and turned fully toward Rachel, his hand moving inside his jacket. "Lady, you got no idea who you're fucking with." "Neither do you," Rachel said quietly. She saw it before he finished the motion, the telltale reach for a weapon, the shift in weight distribution, the narrowing of eyes that preceded violence. She'd seen it 1,000 times, in 1,000 different faces across 3 war zones. Time slowed the way it always did when the bullets started flying. Snake Tattoo's hand emerged from his jacket with a snub-nosed .38 revolver street weapon, probably unregistered, designed for close-range intimidation. His finger found the trigger. Rachel moved. 3 steps closed, the 8 feet between them, faster than Snake Tattoo's synapses could fire. Her left hand shot out, fingers wrapping around the revolver's cylinder in a technique her hand-to-hand combat instructor called cylinder catch. Preventing the cylinder from rotating meant the gun couldn't fire. Her right hand, meanwhile, drove forward in a palm strike that caught Snake Tattoo directly under the jaw, snapping his head back with enough force to rattle his brain against his skull. She twisted the gun free from his loosening grip, thumbed the cylinder release, and let 6 .38 special rounds clatter to the floor as Snake Tattoo stumbled backward, his eyes rolling up white. Elapsed time, 2 seconds. Fire Hydrant reacted next, charging forward with the graceless rage of someone who'd won too many bar fights against untrained opponents. He swung a haymaker punch that had power but no finesse, the kind of punch that worked great against drunks, terrible against anyone who knew what they were doing. Rachel ducked under the swing, feeling the breeze of his fist passing overhead, and drove her elbow into his solar plexus with surgical precision. The breath exploded from Fire Hydrant's lungs in a whoosh of beer and garlic. As he doubled over, Rachel grabbed his extended arm, stepped behind him, and applied an armbar that would have made her jiu-jitsu instructor proud. "This is called a Kimura lock," she said conversationally, as Fire Hydrant screamed. If I apply another 15 pounds of pressure, your shoulder socket dislocates. If I apply 30, your humerus bone fractures. Are we clear on who has the leverage here? Fire Hydrant's response was mostly screaming, but Rachel interpreted it as compliance. She released him with a shove that sent him crashing into a table, sending plates of carbonara flying. Elapsed time. 5 seconds. Scarface had his weapon out now, a Glock 17 serious hardware held in a two-handed grip that showed at least some training. He aimed it directly at Rachel's center mass from 12 feet away. "Don't fucking move!" His voice cracked slightly. Adrenaline and shock breaking through the tough guy facade. "I will put you down." Rachel raised her hands slowly, the empty .38 dangling from one finger. "You really want to shoot an unarmed woman in front of 20 witnesses? That's going to look great in court. You think I give a shit about—" Colonel Sullivan's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Son, I'm retired military police. I've already called 911. There are 3 squad cars en route, ETA 2 minutes. If you shoot her, you'll be in prison by midnight. If you lower that weapon and walk away, you might make it to sunrise. Choose wisely." Rachel saw the calculation in Scarface's eyes, weighing his loyalty to Calabrese against 25 to life. His gun hand wavered. That was the moment Rachel moved again. She threw the empty revolver directly at Scarface's face, not hard enough to injure, but enough to trigger his flinch reflex. His eyes closed involuntarily for a quarter second, his aim dropping. Rachel closed the distance in 3 running steps, her right hand striking down on his wrist in a technique called sword hand strike, full force targeting the cluster of nerves on the underside of the forearm. The Glock fell from Scarface's nerveless fingers. Before he could recover, Rachel swept his legs with a low kick that sent him crashing backward. She was on him in an instant, knee on his chest, her hand gripping his throat with just enough pressure to be uncomfortable, but not dangerous. 7 years? She said, her voice barely above a whisper. 7 years in the military, 3 combat deployments, 2 Bronze Stars, and a Purple Heart. You know what that means? It means I've faced men with more training, better weapons, and actual conviction in their cause. You're just a thug in an expensive suit. Scarface's face had gone purple. Who are you? Major Rachel Morgan, United States Army Rangers, and you just made the worst mistake of your life. Elapsed time 15 seconds. The restaurant erupted. Applause started from the back corner, slow at first, then building as the reality of what they'd just witnessed sank in. Luigi rushed out from behind the bar, tears streaming down his face, thanking her in rapid-fire Italian and English. The young couple hugged each other, the girl sobbing with relief. Other diners stood, some filming on their phones, others shouting congratulations. Rachel released Scarface and stood, her hands shaking now that the adrenaline was beginning to ebb. This was always the worst part, the come-down, when her body remembered she was human and not a weapon. "Somebody get me zip ties or extension cords," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling. "These 3 need to stay put until the police arrive." Luigi produced a roll of duct tape from behind the bar, apparently a multi-purpose tool in Italian restaurants, and helped secure the 3 men's hands behind their backs. Snake Tattoo was conscious now, groaning and clutching his jaw. Fire Hydrant was whimpering about his shoulder. Scarface just glared at Rachel with the hatred of a man whose ego had been shattered in front of witnesses. Colonel Sullivan appeared at Rachel's elbow, his face a mixture of awe and concern. That was impressive and incredibly stupid. Probably, Rachel admitted. She could hear sirens now growing louder. But I spent 7 years learning how to protect people. Can't just turn it off because I'm home. Your father would be proud. Rachel's head snapped around. I told you my father is dead. Rachel Major Morgan, there's something you need to know. Something about your father, about what really happened in Desert Storm. But not here. Frank's eyes darted toward the door where red and blue lights were painting the street. Not with cops about to arrive. Then when, after you give your statement, meet me at... The gunshot was shockingly loud in the enclosed space, a thunderclap that turned conversation to screaming. Rachel spun toward the sound, her hand instinctively reaching for the Glock at her waist, and saw Colonel Frank Sullivan stagger backward, a crimson bloom spreading across his chest. His flannel shirt darkened with blood, his eyes wide with shock. Time fragmented everything happening in syrupy, slow-motion Scarface on the floor. Smoke rising from a backup piece, probably a .380 concealed in an ankle holster, his zip-tied hands somehow having worked free, or having not been secured properly in the chaos. Colonel Sullivan falling his knees, buckling his hand, reaching out toward Rachel. Luigi screaming, rushing forward. Rachel's own voice shouting something, orders, maybe her training taking over even as her mind struggled to process what had just happened. She caught Colonel Sullivan as he fell, lowering him to the floor, with the practiced care of someone who'd provided battlefield first aid too many times. Blood pumped between her fingers as she pressed down on the wound through and through right side of the chest, possibly missed the lung, but definitely hit major blood vessels. "Stay with me, Colonel," Rachel said, her voice taking on the command tone that had kept 19-year-old privates from panicking under fire. "You're going to be fine. Ambulance is coming. Just stay with me." Frank's hand grabbed hers with surprising strength, his fingers slick with blood. He pulled her close, his voice a rasping whisper that only she could hear. "Quicksilver. Project Quicksilver. What, Colonel, save your strength? Your father..." Frank coughed, blood flecking his lips. "Quicksilver. He's alive. They kept him all these years?" Rachel's world tilted. "What are you talking about? My father died in Desert Storm." No, he didn't die. He knew too much." Frank's hand fumbled inside his shirt, his movements growing weaker. "They couldn't let him. Couldn't let any of them." His fingers found something around his neck, a chain Rachel realized military issue. Frank yanked it hard, breaking the ball chain, and pressed something small and metal into Rachel's palm. Find the others. 7 pieces. 7 of them. They're killing everyone." Rachel looked down at what he'd given her. It was a fragment of a dog tag, roughly cut, not stamped, but deliberately severed, as if part of a larger whole. The metal was old, weathered with partial letters still visible. Q. Silmore. "Quicksilver," Rachel whispered. "What is Quicksilver?" But Colonel Frank Sullivan's eyes had already gone glassy, his chest still, his final breath rattling out into the chaos of Luigi's trattoria. Rachel sat there, covered in a stranger's blood, holding a fragment of a dog tag that might be connected to the father she'd never known, while police stormed through the door with weapons drawn, and Luigi sobbed in Italian, and the college kids held each other, and somewhere impossibly she could hear her mother's voice from a memory. "Your father was a hero, baby. They said he died for his country. But I always wondered if there was more to the story." Rachel closed Frank Sullivan's eyes with blood-stained fingers and slipped the dog tag fragment into her pocket. "There's always more to the story," she whispered to his corpse. "Always." Outside, more sirens wailed. Inside, Rachel Morgan Major, United States Army Rangers, daughter of a man declared dead 34 years ago, made a decision that would change everything. She was going to find out what Project Quicksilver was. She was going to find out what really happened to her father. And if Frank Sullivan was right, If Jonathan Morgan was somehow still alive after all these years, then someone had 34 years of answers to provide. And Rachel was very, very good at extracting answers. The Boston Police Department's interrogation room smelled like stale coffee and old lies. Rachel had been sitting in the metal chair for 2 hours, telling the same story to 3 different detectives, each one looking at her with that mixture of suspicion and grudging respect that cops reserved for people who did their job better than they did. Detective Maria Santos. A compact woman with tired eyes and a wedding ring she kept twisting, set down her notepad and leaned back. Let me get this straight, Major Morgan. 3 armed men walk into Luigi's threatened civilians, and you, a woman who weighs maybe 130 soaking wet, take down all 3 in under 20 seconds. 15 seconds, Rachel corrected. And I'm 145. Muscle weighs more than fat. Santos's partner, Detective James Chen, a younger guy with the eager energy of someone still trying to prove himself, shook his head. The security footage backs up her story, Maria. Frame by frame, it's exactly what she said. It's like watching a Marvel movie, except it's real. That's what worries me. Santos fixed Rachel with a hard stare. People who can do what you did don't work alone. They work for organizations, agencies. So I'll ask again, are you running some kind of operation here? Because if this was a setup, if you were targeting Calabrese's crew— I was eating linguine, Rachel said flatly. The only thing I was targeting was my appetite. And Colonel Sullivan, the man who died in your arms. Rachel's jaw tightened. Never met him before tonight. He approached my table, said he served with my father. That's it. That's it. Chen pulled out a photo, slid it across the table. Because Colonel Frank Sullivan was flagged in our system. 3 months ago, he filed a report claiming he was being followed. Said someone was trying to silence witnesses from an old military operation. We thought he was paranoid, maybe suffering from PTSD. Now he's dead, and you're the last person he spoke to. Rachel stared at the photo. Frank in his dress uniform, younger, hopeful, the kind of soldier who still believed the system worked. What did he tell you about the operation? Santos and Chen exchanged glances. Santos spoke carefully. He wouldn't give details, said it was classified that he needed to speak with someone in military intelligence first. We told him to go through proper channels. He said the proper channels were the problem. Rachel's hand drifted to her pocket where the dog tag fragment pressed against her thigh like a brand. She hadn't told them about it. Some instinct, the same one that had kept her alive in Syria, told her to keep that card close to her chest. Can I go? Rachel asked. Unless you're charging me with something, I've given you my statement. Multiple times. Santos drummed her fingers on the table, clearly wrestling with the decision. Finally, she nodded. You're free to go. But Major Morgan, stay in Boston. We'll have more questions. I'm sure you will. Rachel stood her body, protesting. The adrenaline crash had left her muscles sore, her hands shaking slightly. As she reached the door, Chen called out. Major, for what it's worth, what you did tonight, protecting those people that took guts. Real heroism. Rachel turned back, and for a moment she let them see past the armor. Heroism is just another word for being too stubborn to let bad things happen. But thank you, Detective. The precinct lobby was chaos, reporters crowding the entrance, camera flashes, popping like small arms fire voices shouting questions. Someone had leaked that an Army Ranger had taken down 3 mob enforcers. The story was already going viral, Rachel realized. By morning, her face would be on every news site in America. Perfect. Exactly what she didn't need. She slipped out through the side exit, the one the cops used for smoke breaks, and found herself in an alley that smelled like garbage and rain. The March air bit through her blood-stained sweater. They'd bagged her original clothes as evidence, given her a BPD hoodie that hung loose on her frame. Her phone buzzed. 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, all from numbers she didn't recognize. News outlets, probably, or internet sleuths who'd tracked down her contact information. Rachel turned the phone off, removed the battery, a trick she'd learned in Syria when avoiding enemy signals intelligence, and started walking. She had no destination in mind, no plan beyond putting distance between herself and the precinct. Her feet carried her through Boston's streets on autopilot, past closed shops and late-night bars, through Chinatown's neon glow, and into the financial district's concrete canyons. It was nearly midnight when she found herself at the Boston Public Garden, staring at the swan boats floating like ghost ships on the pond's dark water. Her mother used to bring her here as a child before the deployments, before the cancer, when life was still simple enough to fix with ice cream and stories. Rachel sat on a bench and finally allowed herself to pull out the dog tag fragment. Under the park's sodium lights, she could see more details. The metal was old, definitely military issue, but the cut was precise, machined, not hacked. Someone had deliberately severed this tag, dividing it into pieces. And the partial letters, when she traced them with her finger, suggested a name, QU, probably Quicksilver SIL, part of Silver, again, or maybe something else, MOR Morgan. Her father's name, Project Quicksilver, Rachel whispered to the empty park. What the hell were you involved in, Dad? Her father's file, the one the Army had given her mother after the memorial service, contained almost nothing useful. Captain Jonathan Morgan, 75th Ranger Regiment, killed in action during Operation Desert Storm while conducting a classified mission. Remains unrecovered. Purple Heart, Bronze Star, with valor, honored for courage under fire. Standard stuff. The kind of sanitized biography the military provided for families when the truth was too classified or too ugly to share. But Frank Sullivan's dying words suggested a different story. A conspiracy, maybe. A cover-up that had lasted 34 years and was still killing witnesses. Rachel's phone, still disassembled, buzzed once, then died. She stared at it, then at the dog tag, then at her own reflection in the pond's black water. In that moment, she looked like a stranger, hollow-eyed, haunted, covered in another man's blood. Find the others, Frank had said. 7 pieces. 7 soldiers, Rachel thought. 7 pieces of a dog tag, each one held by a different member of the team. Insurance, maybe. Or evidence. Something important enough to kill for even decades later. She needed information. Real information, not the scrubbed files the Army provided. She needed access to classified military records, personnel files, operation reports from Desert Storm. She needed a hacker. Rachel reassembled her phone, turned it back on, and scrolled through her contacts until she found the name she was looking for, Marcus Webb. They'd served together in Afghanistan back when Rachel was still a lieutenant, learning how to lead soldiers through hell. Marcus had been Signal Corps, a communications specialist with an unofficial sideline in creative database access. The kind of guy who could find anything digital if you knew how to ask, and could afford his rates. She dialed. It rang 4 times before a sleepy voice answered. Do you know what time it is? Marcus, it's Rachel Morgan. A pause. Then more alert. Major Morgan. Holy shit, I just saw you on Twitter. You really throw down with the Boston mob? That's complicated. Listen, I need your help. Off the books, completely black. Can you still access military personnel databases? Whoa, Rachel, I'm out. Clean. I do cybersecurity consulting now, totally legitimate. I can't just... Marcus! Rachel's voice went cold command hard. A man died tonight trying to tell me about my father. The same father the Army told me was KIA in '91. Someone has been covering something up for 34 years and they're still killing people to keep it quiet. So I'm going to ask you one more time. Can you help me, or do I need to find someone else? Another pause, longer this time. When Marcus spoke again, the sleepiness was gone, replaced by the focused intensity Rachel remembered from those nights in Kandahar when he'd hack into enemy communications just to help them avoid ambushes. What do you need? Everything on Project Quicksilver. Everything on Captain Jonathan Morgan and his team from Desert Storm. Personnel files, after-action reports, classified operation details, anything and everything. Rachel, if this is as buried as you think someone's gonna notice when I go digging, these systems log everything. Then don't leave fingerprints. You taught me that much. She could hear him thinking, weighing risks against loyalty. Finally, okay, but this is gonna take time. Military archives from the 90s were digitized poorly, half of it still on microfiche, the other half's encrypted with outdated protocols. Give me 48 hours. You have 24. Rachel. People are dying. Marcus. 24 hours or their blood is on both our hands. She hung up before he could argue, then immediately regretted the harshness. Marcus was a good man, a friend. But this wasn't a time for gentle persuasion. This was triage, and every second counted. Rachel's next call was to someone she'd been avoiding since returning from Syria. Captain Jennifer Hayes, her commanding officer, and the closest thing she had to a friend in the Rangers. Hayes answered on the second ring, her voice crisp despite the late hour. Major Morgan, I was wondering when you'd call. I assume this is about the incident at Luigi's. Word travels fast. You single-handedly dismantled 3 armed men in a public restaurant, Rachel. The Joint Chiefs are watching the footage on repeat. Half of them want to give you another medal, the other half want to bury you before you become a publicity nightmare. Which half do you belong to? Hayes laughed, sharp and bitter. I'm in the glad you're alive but terrified about what you'll do next category. What's really going on? This wasn't just good Samaritan heroics. I know you. Rachel hesitated, then decided Hayes deserved at least partial truth. The man who died tonight, Colonel Frank Sullivan, he knew my father. Said my father didn't die in Desert Storm. Said there was a cover-up, something called Project Quicksilver. The line went silent for a long moment. When Hayes spoke again, her voice had changed, cautious, careful the way people sound when they're suddenly aware someone might be listening. Rachel, listened to me very carefully. Whatever Sullivan told you, forget it. Let it go. There are things in military history that stay classified for good reasons. Good reasons. He died in my arms, Jennifer. He gave me evidence that my father might still be alive. You're telling me to just walk away from that. I'm telling you that some doors once opened can't be closed. I'm telling you that the people who manage these secrets don't care about justice or truth. They care about control. And if you go kicking down those doors, they will bury you. Is that a threat? It's a warning from someone who gives a damn about you. Hayes sighed heavy with something that sounded like regret. I can't help you with this, Rachel. Officially or unofficially. I'm sorry. The call ended. Rachel stared at the dead phone, feeling the isolation settle around her like fog. No support from her chain of command. No official channels to pursue. Just her a mysterious dog tag fragment and a conspiracy that had already killed at least one man. Welcome home, Major Morgan. The walk to her apartment took another 20 minutes through streets that grew progressively emptier as she moved away from downtown. Rachel lived in Brighton in a studio apartment that cost too much and offered too little, but it was hers, the first place she'd had to herself since joining the army at 18. She was fumbling for her keys when she noticed the door was already open. Not much, just a centimeter barely visible in the dim hallway light. But enough. Enough to send every combat instinct screaming. Rachel pressed her back against the wall beside the door, her hand finding the Glock at her waist. She controlled her breathing slow, measured the way her instructors had drilled into her during close-quarters battle training. Listen. Assess. Act. From inside the apartment, she heard nothing. No movement, no breathing, no floorboard creaks. Either whoever had broken in was very good at staying still, or they'd already left. Rachel pushed the door open with her foot, staying outside the fatal funnel, the doorway where most people got shot during breaches. She sliced the room with her Glock clearing corners in the practiced rhythm that had kept her alive through a dozen compound raids in Syria. The apartment was empty, but someone had definitely been there. Her belongings were scattered across the floor, clothes pulled from drawers, books swept from shelves, furniture, cushions sliced open with knife precision. Professional work. Rachel recognized, not random vandalism or burglary. This was a search operation. They were looking for something, for what Frank Sullivan had given her. Rachel's hand tightened on the dog tag fragment in her pocket. She'd been right to keep it hidden from the police. Whoever was behind Project Quicksilver had moved incredibly fast. Frank had died less than 3 hours ago, and already they'd tracked Rachel down, broken into her apartment, searched everything. Which meant they were watching. Probably still watching. Rachel backed out of the apartment, slowly keeping her weapon up, eyes scanning for any signs of surveillance. She found the first camera in the hallway smoke detector, tiny professional grade, the kind that cost serious money. The second was in the stairwell, disguised as a thermostat sensor. She was being tracked, monitored, assessed. The question was whether they'd make a move now or wait to see what she'd do next. Rachel chose to give them an answer. She walked to her car, a 10-year-old Honda Civic that ran more on hope than maintenance, and drove. No destination yet, just movement, making it harder to set up an ambush. She took random turns, doubled back through side streets, ran 2 red lights, and broke every rule of defensive driving to see if anyone followed. 3 cars stayed with her through all of it. A black Suburban too expensive for this neighborhood, a silver sedan with tinted windows, and a motorcycle that hung back but never lost visual contact. Professional surveillance. Multiple units coordinated communication. This wasn't street-level mob muscle. This was government, or close enough to make no difference. Rachel's mind raced through options. She couldn't go to the police if this conspiracy ran as deep as Frank suggested. Local cops would be useless or compromised. She couldn't go to her military contacts. Hayes had already made clear that door was closed. She couldn't go to ground in Boston. They already knew where she lived, where she worked, probably where she bought her groceries. She needed allies, people outside the system, people who owed debts or had their own reasons to mistrust authority. Rachel pulled out her phone and made one more call to a number she'd sworn she'd never use again. Veterans Underground Network, a gravelly voice answered. Who's calling? This is Major Rachel Morgan, Army Rangers. I need to speak with Eddie Thompson. A pause. Then, Thompson doesn't take calls from active duty. Policy. I know the policy. Tell him it's about Operation Desert Storm and a soldier who didn't die when he was supposed to. Tell him there's a conspiracy that's been killing veterans for 3 decades. Tell him I have proof. Another pause, longer this time. Rachel heard muffled voices, someone arguing in the background. Finally, where are you? Being followed by at least 3 surveillance units. I need a safe house, need it now. You know the meeting point. Rachel did. Every veteran in Boston knew about the meeting point, an abandoned VFW hall in Dorchester that had been converted into an unofficial shelter and gathering space for vets who'd fallen through the system's cracks. The kind of place where questions weren't asked and secrets stayed buried. I can be there in 20 minutes. Make it 15. And Major, lose those tails or don't come at all. We don't let the government follow people to our door. The line went dead. Rachel looked in her rearview mirror at the three vehicles maintaining their careful distance. Losing them would require creativity, aggression, and a willingness to break several laws. She smiled grimly. Good thing she'd spent the last 7 years perfecting all three. The next 15 minutes turned Brighton's streets into a tactical nightmare for her pursuers. Rachel used every trick she'd learned, from defensive driving courses' sudden turns, without signals, driving the wrong way down one-way streets, cutting through parking garages and exiting through different doors. She forced the Suburban to choose between running a red light in front of a police cruiser or losing visual contact. The sedan got stuck behind a city bus. The motorcycle stayed persistent until Rachel led it into a dead-end alley and then gunned her engine backward, forcing the rider to dump his bike to avoid collision. By the time she reached the meeting point, a decrepit 2-story building with boarded windows and faded American flags, she was reasonably certain she'd arrived alone. The door opened before she could knock. A woman in her 50s with military tattoos and suspicious eyes looked her up and down. "You Morgan?" "I am." "You armed?" "Yes." "Good. You'll need to be. Come inside." The interior was nothing like Rachel expected. Outside the building looked abandoned. Inside it was a functioning community center, veterans sprawled on donated couches playing cards, sharing cigarettes and stories. The walls were covered with photographs, unit patches, memorial plaques. The air smelled like coffee cigarettes, and the particular kind of exhaustion that came from surviving wars only to lose the peace. Eddie Thompson waited in the back room, sitting in a wheelchair beside a card table covered with maps and documents. He was older than Rachel expected, 70s maybe, with white hair cut high and tight, and eyes that had seen too much to surprise easily. His left leg was missing from the knee, down his right arm ended at the elbow. Vietnam, Rachel guessed. The kind of wounds that took everything except the will to keep fighting. "Major Morgan?" Eddie's voice was the same one from the phone, gravel and smoke. "You've got 15 minutes to convince me you're not bringing heat down on my people. Talk." Rachel pulled out the dog tag fragment and set it on the table between them. Eddie stared at it for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he reached into his own shirt and pulled out a chain. Hanging from it was another fragment of metal, roughly cut with partial letters that matched Rachel's piece. "Son of a bitch," Eddie whispered. "Quicksilver, after all these years." Rachel's heart hammered. "You were there. You were part of it." "I was a lot of things," Eddie said quietly. "Most of them I'm not proud of. But yeah, I was there. Task Force Quicksilver, February 1991, Iraq. And your father, Captain Jonathan Morgan, was the best man I ever served with." He looked up at Rachel, and she saw tears in his eyes. "They told us he was dead. They told us all of them were dead. Frank Sullivan said my father's alive. Said they've been killing everyone who knew the truth." Eddie nodded slowly. "Frank was the 7th. I'm the 8th, which means I don't have much time left." He picked up the dog tag fragment, held it next to his own. They fit together perfectly, forming 2/7 of a complete tag. "You want to know what Project Quicksilver was, Major? You want to know what your father died to expose? I want to know everything." Eddie Thompson looked at her with something between pity and respect. "Then sit down, kid, because what I'm about to tell you is going to change everything you thought you knew about honor duty and what your country is really capable of." Rachel sat. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Her phone buzzed with messages she wouldn't read. And somewhere in the darkness, people who killed to protect secrets were hunting her. But for the first time since Frank Sullivan died in her arms, Rachel Morgan felt something besides grief and confusion. She felt purpose. Eddie Thompson poured whiskey into 2 chipped coffee mugs, his prosthetic hand moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent decades learning to live with less. He pushed one mug across the table to Rachel, and she took it without hesitation. Some conversations required liquid courage, and the look in Eddie's eyes told her this would be one of them. February 23rd, 1991. Eddie began his voice, taking on the distant quality of someone revisiting old ghosts. Ground war in Iraq had been going for maybe 72 hours. Coalition forces were steamrolling through Kuwait. Saddam's army was in full retreat. Everyone thought the war was basically over. But that's when we got the call. Rachel leaned forward, the dog tag fragment pressed between her palm and the table's scarred wood. What kind of call? The kind that comes through encrypted channels at 0300 hours with orders that don't officially exist. Task Force Quicksilver 8 men, all Rangers, all with top-secret clearances. Your father was the CO. I was his sergeant, his right hand. Eddie's good hand trembled slightly as he raised the mug to his lips. They told us there was a facility 30 clicks north of Basra. Underground bunker heavily fortified, supposedly abandoned when Iraqi forces retreated. But satellite imagery showed fresh tire tracks, recent activity. Someone was still there destroying evidence. Evidence of what? Eddie's laugh was bitter. That's what we asked. They said biological weapons, chemical agents, the stuff Saddam had been stockpiling. Our mission was simple. Get in, secure any remaining materials, extract them for analysis. Standard WMD interdiction. Except it wasn't standard at all. He reached into a drawer beneath the table and pulled out a faded photograph handled so many times the edges had worn soft. 8 men in desert camouflage stood in front of a Black Hawk helicopter, young and confident, armed with the casual arrogance of warriors who'd never lost. Rachel's eyes found her father immediately. He stood in the center, taller than the others, with the same gray-green eyes she saw in her own mirror every morning. "That's your dad," Eddie said, pointing with his prosthetic finger. "Captain Jonathan Morgan. Best officer I ever served under. Smart, fair, tough as coffin nails when he needed to be. The kind of leader men would follow into hell." Rachel traced her father's face with her fingertip, memorizing details her mother's photographs had never captured. The way he stood, the set of his jaw, the faint smile that suggested he'd just said something that made his team laugh. He looked so alive, so real. Not the mythical dead hero from her childhood stories, but an actual person who'd breathed and laughed and led soldiers into battle. "What happened at the facility?" she asked quietly. Eddie's expression darkened. "We infiltrated at dawn, easiest time to move when the heat signatures from vehicles and bodies blend with the warming desert. Place was exactly where intelligence said it'd be built into a hillside reinforced concrete entrance disguised as a water treatment plant. Iraqi guards were long gone, but the doors were still sealed. Your father ordered us to breach." He paused, reaching for the whiskey bottle to refill his mug. His hands shook harder now, and Rachel realized he was reliving something terrible, something that had festered in his mind for 34 years. Inside was a nightmare. Not the kind you see in war movies. This was different. Clinical, sterile, like walking into a hospital designed by the devil himself. The main chamber was huge, maybe 50 meters across, filled with glass cylinders and metal tables and equipment I couldn't even name. And the smell, God, the smell was... Eddie's voice cracked. It was death. Concentrated, processed, weaponized death. Rachel waited, letting him find his words. Outside the room, she could hear the murmur of other veterans, the click of pool balls, someone laughing at a joke. Normal life continuing while Eddie exhumed the past. "We found documents," he continued. "Files, photographs, test results. All in English major. not Arabic. English. American English. The whole facility wasn't Iraqi at all, it was ours. Built by American contractors funded through black budget appropriations, staffed by U.S. military scientists working under false identities, and the research they were conducting. Eddie met her eyes, and Rachel saw something break in him. They were testing biological agents on prisoners, Iraqi POWs, Kurdish villagers, anyone they could grab and claim as enemy combatants. Human experimentation just like the Nazis did, except this was us. This was America. Rachel's stomach turned. That's not possible. We have laws, international treaties. Laws are just words on paper when no one's watching, Major. This whole operation was buried so deep even most of the Pentagon didn't know about it. The scientists called it Project Helios Sun God, bringer of light and death. The idea was to develop weapons that could target specific genetic markers diseases that would only affect certain ethnic populations. Biological warfare with a precision scalpel instead of a hammer. Jesus Christ. Your father took one look at those files and knew exactly what we'd found. Knew that if this ever got out, it would destroy America's moral authority forever. We'd be no different than the monsters we claimed to fight against. Eddie's voice grew harder, sharper. He made the call right there. Said we were taking everything, every file, every sample, every piece of evidence. Said we were going to blow this up so wide that everyone responsible would burn. Rachel understood now why her father had been silenced. Men had gone to prison for exposing war crimes far less damaging than this. My lie had been a massacre of hundreds. Project Helios sounded like systematic atrocities sanctioned at the highest levels, with implications that would topple governments. We loaded up everything we could carry, Eddie said. Spent 6 hours photographing documents, collecting samples, building a case that could stand up in any court. Your father was meticulous about it. He knew that if we didn't have ironclad proof, they'd just deny everything and call us traitors. We worked like dogs, knowing every second we stayed increased the risk of discovery. Someone found you. Eddie nodded grimly. Our exfil helicopter never showed. Instead, we got a different bird, unmarked Blackhawk no identification numbers crew in black uniforms without insignia. Your father knew immediately something was wrong. He ordered us to scatter hide the evidence run for the secondary extraction point, 15 clicks south. But you didn't make it. 5 of us made it out of the facility. Your father, me, Frank Sullivan, and 2 others, Ramirez and Chen. We split up, each carrying part of the evidence. Your father had the brilliant idea to cut our dog tags into pieces, give each surviving member a fragment. Said if anything happened to one of us, the others could use it to find each other, prove we were all part of the same unit. Rachel held up her fragment. 7 pieces, Frank said. But you just said 5 survived. Eddie's face went pale. That's because they hunted us like animals, Major. Ramirez got hit by a sniper about 3 clicks from the facility, clean shot through the head, professional work. Chen made it to the extraction point, but the helicopter that picked him up went down 20 minutes later. Mechanical failure, they called it. Both men dead before we even left Iraq. And the other 3? Your father, me, and Frank got separated in a sandstorm. I took shrapnel from an IED, lost my leg right there in the desert. Frank dragged me to a medevac unit, told them I'd stepped on an Iraqi mine. They evacuated me to Germany, then stateside. I spent 8 months in Walter Reed, and by the time I was conscious enough to ask questions, they told me the rest of my unit had been KIA. Gave me a silver star and a medical discharge, and made it real clear that asking questions about classified operations was a good way to end up in Leavenworth. You believed them. What choice did I have? I was a grunt with half my limbs missing, going up against people who could make soldiers disappear. I took my discharge, got my disability checks, and tried to forget. But Frank never stopped looking. He spent 30 years tracking down rumors, filing FOIA requests, making himself a nuisance to everyone who'd been involved. Eddie's voice filled with regret. I should have helped him. Should have stood up sooner. But I was scared, Major. Scared of what they'd do to me, to my family. You're helping now. Now I'm dying anyway. Lung cancer stage 4. Doctors give me maybe 6 months. So yeah, now I can afford to tell the truth. Better late than never, right? The bitterness in his voice could have stripped paint. Rachel absorbed this, her mind working through implications and connections. The surveillance outside my apartment, the people following me, they're cleaning house. They know Frank reached out to me before he died, know he might have passed along evidence. They're tying up loose ends. They've been tying up loose ends for 3 decades. Every member of Task Force Quicksilver is dead except me. Every scientist who worked at that facility dead or disappeared. Every Pentagon official who signed off on Project Helios conveniently retired or killed in accidents. Eddie reached into his shirt and pulled out a small thumb drive, setting it on the table with a click. But Frank was smarter than they gave him credit for. He kept copies of everything, spent years piecing together fragments of the truth. This drive contains everything he collected: names, dates, transactions, photographs. It's not complete evidence, not enough to convict anyone on its own, but combined with what your father had, my father. Rachel seized on the words. Frank said he was alive. You said everyone was dead. Which is it? Eddie's expression softened with something that might have been hope or might have been cruelty. I said everyone was KIA, according to official records. But there's a difference between dead and declared dead, Major. Your father never gave them what they wanted, the location of the evidence he'd hidden. So they couldn't kill him. Not until they recovered everything that could expose Project Helios. Rachel's heart hammered. Where is he? I don't know for certain. But Frank had a theory based on black budget facility locations and prisoner movement patterns. There's a place off books doesn't exist on any official documentation called Blackfish Station. Deep in the Nevada desert near the old nuclear test sites. It's where they send people who are too dangerous to release, but too valuable to kill. Ghost prisoners held indefinitely without charges or trials. How do we prove he's there? Eddie shook his head. We don't. Not without inside access. Not without resources we don't have. Blackfish is run by a private military contractor funded through shell corporations guarded by operators who'd shoot first and never bother with questions. It's a black site in our own country, Major. As unreachable as any Taliban compound in Afghanistan. Rachel stood pacing the small room like a caged predator. Her mind raced through tactical options, resource assessments, probability calculations. Every combat operation started with the same basic questions. What's the objective? What's the opposition? What assets do we have? What's the acceptable risk? The man behind this, she said. The one who authorized Project Helios, who's been covering it up all these years. Who is he? Eddie hesitated, and Rachel saw real fear in his eyes for the first time. That's the part that'll get us both killed just for saying out loud. The man who ran Project Helios wasn't some rogue scientist or low-level Pentagon bureaucrat. He was a decorated colonel in 1991, just back from Desert Storm with a Bronze Star and media attention. Used his war hero status to launch a political career. Now he's Senator William Blackwood, and he's about 6 months away from announcing his presidential campaign. The name hit Rachel like a punch. Everyone knew Senator Blackwood, the square-jawed, silver-haired former soldier who'd built his entire brand on military service and American exceptionalism. He gave speeches about honor and sacrifice, sponsored veterans legislation, showed up at military funerals with cameras in tow. Rachel had even voted for him in the last election, believing his rhetoric about taking care of soldiers. Blackwood, she whispered. He's going to run for president. And he'll probably win, Eddie said bitterly. America loves a war hero, especially one who tells them everything they want to hear about strength and security. Never mind that his heroism was built on the corpses of prisoners he murdered in the name of science. Never mind that he spent 3 decades silencing anyone who could expose the truth. Rachel's phone buzzed Marcus Webb, her hacker friend, the message simple and urgent. Call me, Now." She stepped into the hallway, where the noise from the main room provided cover for conversation. Marcus answered on the first ring, his voice tight with stress. "Rachel, whatever you've gotten yourself into, it's worse than you thought. I started digging into Project Quicksilver like you asked, and I hit tripwires everywhere. Military servers flagged my access, set off alerts in 3 different intelligence agencies. Someone very powerful is monitoring any searches related to this operation." "Did you get anything before they noticed?" "Fragments. Personnel records that were supposedly destroyed. I found backup copies in an old archive server someone forgot to wipe. Your father's file shows him as KIA, but there's a discrepancy in the date stamps. The death certificate was filed 3 weeks before the official date of death. Someone backdated it probably to cover up the timeline." Rachel's pulse quickened. "What else?" "There's a funding trail buried under layers of shell corporations and black budget appropriations. Millions of dollars flowing to a location in Nevada near Groom Lake. The facility doesn't have a name in the official records, but the accounting codes match patterns used for high-security detention centers." "Blackfish Station," Rachel breathed. "You already know about it?" Marcus sounded surprised. "Rachel, this thing is radioactive. I'm talking compartmentalized beyond top-secret access, restricted to maybe a dozen people in the entire government. If your father is there, getting him out would require an army." "I know." Rachel watched through the doorway as Eddie talked quietly with another veteran, their conversation animated urgent. "Marcus, I need everything you found, and I need information on Senator William Blackwood financial records communications, anything that connects him to Project Helios." "That's insane. Blackwood has security that would make the CIA jealous. If I go poking around his files, then be careful, but do it." Rachel softened her voice. "Please, Marcus. My father spent 34 years in a hole because he tried to expose war crimes. If we don't finish what he started, Blackwood becomes president and buries this forever." A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Marcus sighed. 48 hours. That's all I can promise. After that, I'm burning my access and going dark. The heat on this is too intense." "Thank you." Rachel ended the call and returned to find Eddie had been joined by 2 other veterans, the woman who'd let Rachel inside, and a younger man, maybe late 30s, with the wary eyes of someone who'd spent time in recent wars. Iraq or Afghanistan, Rachel guessed. The kind of soldier who'd learned that America's wars weren't as simple as the recruiting posters suggested. "This is Sarah Chen and Miguel Torres," Eddie said. "They run the Veterans Underground network with me. I told them about Quicksilver, about your father. They want to help." Sarah spoke first, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to command. "We've got about 60 veterans in our network, Major. Some active duty taking leave, most discharged or retired. All of them have reasons to mistrust the system. All of them would follow the right leader into the right fight. What you're describing, exposing government war crimes, rescuing a POW from an illegal black site, that's the kind of mission that gives meaning to everything we've lost." Miguel nodded. "I spent 2 tours in Iraq watching contractors get rich while soldiers died for lies. If there's a chance to make that mean something, to show the world what really happens when nobody's watching, I'm in. A lot of us are." Rachel looked at the 3 of them, at the hope and anger and desperate need for purpose written on their faces. She thought about Luigi's restaurant, about the young couple she'd protected, about Frank Sullivan dying in her arms. She thought about her father, locked away for 34 years, waiting for someone to finish what he'd started. "This isn't going to be a sanctioned operation," she said carefully. "No official support, no legal protection if things go wrong. If we do this, we're criminals by definition. Breaking into a federal facility, assault on security forces, probably a dozen other charges I can't even name. Everyone involved could spend the rest of their lives in prison." "Some of us are already living in prisons," Sarah said quietly. PTSD survivors' guilt, moral injury from things we did or saw or failed to stop. At least this prison would have walls we can see. We'd need intelligence on Blackfish Station. Rachel continued, her mind shifting into mission planning mode. Layouts, security protocols, guard rotations, response times. We'd need equipment, weapons, vehicles, communications gear. We'd need a plan that doesn't get everyone killed in the first 5 minutes. We've got sources, Miguel said. People who've worked security at black sites, contractors who've installed systems in places that don't exist. Give us 72 hours, we can get you a basic layout. Rachel pulled out her phone, opened a map application, zoomed in on Nevada's desert regions. Blackfish Station is here, roughly speaking. She pointed to an area of nothing, empty desert between Area 51 and the old nuclear test sites. Middle of nowhere, which means they'll see us coming from miles away. We'd need a diversion, something big enough to pull security forces away from the detention areas. Or we don't go in shooting, Eddie suggested. These black sites, they need supplies, right? Food, water, equipment. Regular deliveries from contractors who don't ask questions. What if we hijack a supply run, get inside the perimeter before anyone knows we're hostile? Rachel considered this, running scenarios. Possible but risky. Supply drivers would have codes, identification, probably biometrics. We'd need someone on the inside to... The explosion cut her off. Not close, but close enough, maybe 2 blocks away, the kind of deep crump that Rachel's body remembered from IEDs and airstrikes. The building shook, dust raining from the ceiling, and every veteran in the room dropped into combat stances before conscious thought engaged. Rachel was moving before the dust settled, Glock in hand, racing toward the front entrance. Through the boarded windows she could see flames licking the night sky, black smoke billowing up from somewhere nearby. Car alarms wailed, people screamed, and beneath it all came a sound Rachel knew too well. Automatic weapons fire, the distinctive chatter of M4 carbines on full auto. "They found us," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Everyone armed, defensive positions now." Sarah was already moving, shouting orders that organized chaos into purpose. Veterans grabbed weapons from hidden caches, hunting rifles, handguns, even a few military-grade rifles that were definitely not legal in Massachusetts. Within seconds, the ramshackle community center transformed into a fortified position. Windows covered by armed defenders, exits secured a perimeter established with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done this before, in much worse places. Eddie wheeled up beside Rachel, a shotgun across his lap. "How many?" Rachel peered through a gap in the boards, counting muzzle flashes and movement patterns. "At least 8, probably more. Professional tactics, military-grade weapons. This isn't local cops, Eddie. This is a kill team. For us or for you? Does it matter?" Rachel checked her Glock's magazine, 15 rounds plus 1 in the chamber. Not nearly enough for a sustained firefight against a numerically superior force with better weapons. "We need to evacuate, get these people out before..." The front door exploded inward flashbangs, following the world dissolving into white light and deafening noise. Rachel felt herself thrown backward, her ears ringing, her vision whited out. Training took over. She rolled, came up firing blind, aiming for where the door used to be. Return fire stitched the air above her head, rounds punching through drywall and wood. Someone screamed, cut short. Rachel's vision cleared enough to see black-clad figures pouring through the entrance, faceless behind ballistic masks, weapons up and firing. But they weren't firing at Rachel. The kill team swept past her, past the defenders, heading deeper into the building with the single-minded purpose of operators executing a specific mission. They were here for something or someone particular. Rachel understood a split second before Eddie shouted it. "They're going for the archives." The back room where Eddie kept Frank Sullivan's collected evidence, where decades of research and documentation lived in filing cabinets and hard drives. The room that contained proof of everything Project Helios Quicksilver Blackwood's crimes. They were here to destroy the evidence and kill anyone who'd seen it. Rachel sprinted after them, Miguel and Sarah flanking her, their weapons barking in the confined space. One black-clad figure went down, then another, but there were too many, too well-trained. They reached the back room, started pulling hard drives and files, setting thermite charges that would reduce everything to slag and ash. No, Eddie's voice raw with desperation. That's everything, 30 years of work. Rachel made the calculation in half a second. She couldn't stop them from destroying the physical evidence, couldn't fight through 8 armed operators to save filing cabinets and hard drives. But she could do something else. She could take what mattered most. Rachel dove for the table where Eddie's dog tag fragment lay, snatching it along with the thumb drive Frank had prepared. The same moment, Sarah grabbed the photograph of Task Force Quicksilver from the wall. Miguel provided covering fire, as all 3 of them retreated toward the side exit, Eddie wheeling furiously behind them. The thermite charges ignited with a white-hot glare that turned the back room into an inferno. Paper-burned plastic melted metal glowed red, and then white, and then ceased to exist. Decades of evidence gone in seconds. But Rachel had what mattered: the dog tags, the drive, the photograph. The pieces that could still prove everything if she lived long enough to use them. They burst out the side exit into chaos, veterans, scattering into the Boston night, pursued by operators who fired with lethal precision. Rachel heard bodies falling, heard screams cut short, and knew people were dying to buy her escape. Go! Sarah shoved Rachel toward a waiting van. Get out of here. We'll hold them. I'm not leaving you to— That's an order, Major. Sarah's voice carried the snap of command that transcended rank or service branch. You're the only one who can finish this, so finish it. Rachel ran Eddie's wheelchair, somehow keeping pace, Miguel providing rear security. They piled into the van, driven by a grizzled veteran who asked no questions, just floored the accelerator the moment the door closed. Behind them, the meeting point burned. Gunfire echoed. Sirens wailed in the distance, arriving too late, as always. Rachel clutched the dog tag fragments in her fist, feeling the sharp edges bite into her palm, hard enough to draw blood. The blood of her father's unit mixed with her own. A covenant sealed across 34 years. Where to? The driver asked. Rachel met Eddie's eyes in the rearview mirror. The old veteran looked smaller, now diminished by loss and pain, and the weight of watching his refuge burn. But his eyes still held fire. Nevada, Rachel said. We're going to finish what my father started. We're going to Blackfish Station. That's suicide, Miguel said flatly. Probably. Rachel reloaded her Glock with practiced motions. Anyone who wants out, now's the time to say so. Last chance for sanity. Nobody spoke. The van drove on through Boston's wounded streets, carrying 4 veterans toward either redemption or destruction, and Rachel couldn't tell which would come first. The safe house was a hunting cabin in New Hampshire's White Mountains, 3 hours north of Boston, and far enough off the grid that even the NSA would struggle to find it. The veteran who owned it, a Marine named Patterson, who'd lost both his sons in Fallujah, had handed Eddie the keys years ago with a simple instruction: use it when the world gets too loud. Tonight, the world wasn't just loud. It was screaming. Rachel stood on the cabin's porch, watching dawn paint the mountains in shades of gold and red colors that reminded her too much of fire and blood. Behind her, through the cabin's thin walls, she could hear Miguel on an encrypted phone trying to reach other members of the Veterans Underground Network accounting for survivors organizing evacuation for those who'd made it out of the meeting point alive. The casualty report had come in an hour ago. 4 dead, 7 wounded, 3 missing. Sarah Chen was among the wounded taken to a sympathetic doctor who treated gunshot wounds without reporting them the kind of medical care that existed in the gray spaces between law and necessity. She'd survive, but she wouldn't be joining the mission to Nevada. 4 people dead because Rachel had walked into their lives carrying a conspiracy that killed anyone who touched it. Eddie wheeled out onto the porch, a blanket across his lap against the mountain chill. He didn't say anything at first, just sat there watching the sunrise with the patience of someone who'd learned that silence sometimes communicated more than words. "I should have walked away," Rachel said finally. "After Frank died, I should have let it go. Those people would still be alive." Those people knew the risks. They chose to stand up. Eddie's voice was firm, but not unkind. "You dishonor their sacrifice by second-guessing it now. They died fighting for something that mattered, which is more than most people get." "That's supposed to make me feel better?" "No. It's supposed to remind you that you don't get the luxury of guilt until this is finished. Guilt is a peacetime emotion, Major. Right now, you need to be at war." Rachel turned to face him. "I've been at war for 7 years, Eddie. I'm tired of it." "Then finish this one so you can finally rest." He pulled out the photograph of Task Force Quicksilver, the one Sarah had saved from the flames. "These men your father franked me. We've been fighting this war for 34 years. Some of us didn't even know we were still in it, but the enemy never stopped hunting. Now you're the tip of the spear, whether you wanted to be or not. So you can either break under the weight, or you can be sharp enough to cut through to the truth." Rachel took the photograph, studied her father's face in the morning light. He looked so young, maybe 28 or 29, barely older than some of the privates Rachel had led in Syria. What had he been thinking in that moment? Had he known that within weeks his life would be over, his family would mourn a lie, his truth would be buried for decades? "Tell me about him," she said quietly. "Not the officer, not the mission. Tell me about Jonathan Morgan, the person." Eddie smiled, distant and sad. He was a book nerd, which nobody expected from a ranger. Always had a paperback in his pack, philosophy history, sometimes poetry. Said if you didn't understand why you were fighting, you were just a murderer in a uniform. He believed in the mission, believed America was supposed to be better than its enemies. That's why finding Project Helios broke something in him. "What do you mean? When we walked into that facility and saw what our country had done, your father just stood there for maybe 5 minutes, not saying anything. Just staring at those glass cylinders full of test subjects, reading the reports written in clinical language that described torture like it was science. Then he took off his helmet, set down his rifle, and said something I'll never forget. 'If we don't stop this, we're no different than the monsters. And I didn't come all this way to become a monster.'" Rachel felt tears burning behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. He had a family waiting. He had a daughter. Why didn't he just follow orders, come home, forget what he saw? Because he was Jonathan Morgan, and Jonathan Morgan couldn't walk away from the truth any more than he could stop breathing. Eddie's voice carried a weight of old grief. He knew what it would cost, knew they'd come after him, probably kill him, but he had this crazy idea that if he collected enough evidence, made it impossible to deny the system would fix itself. The truth would set everyone free. He was wrong. Yeah, he was wrong. Turns out the system doesn't fix itself, it protects itself. But that doesn't make him stupid or naive. It makes him brave. Eddie met Rachel's eyes with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. "You're his daughter. You've got the same fire, The same stubborn refusal to let evil hide in shadows. So the question isn't whether you finish this. The question is whether you do it smart enough to survive. Miguel appeared in the doorway, phone in hand, his expression grim. Marcus Webb just sent an encrypted file. Says it's everything he could pull before he had to burn his access. Also says we need to move fast. Someone traced his intrusion, sent a team to his apartment. He barely got out. Rachel's stomach dropped. Another person running for their life because of her. Is he safe? Says he's going dark, heading to a backup location. Won't tell me where, which is smart. But Major, you need to see what he found. Inside the cabin, Miguel had set up a laptop connected to a satellite modem displaying the encrypted files Marcus had extracted. Rachel scrolled through documents that turned her understanding of Project Helios from abstract horror into specific atrocity. Medical reports described experiments on prisoners' controlled exposure to biological agents, measurement of symptom progression, autopsy findings written with the detached precision of scientists who'd forgotten they were describing murder. Photographs showed facilities that looked like clean rooms, men in hazmat suits, standing over subjects restrained on metal tables. Financial records traced millions of dollars flowing through shell corporations, some of the signatures belonging to officials Rachel recognized from news broadcasts. And then she found Senator William Blackwood. Not as a colonel in 1991, but in recent photographs, meetings with defense contractors' campaign donations from companies that didn't seem to exist, encrypted communications discussing asset management and operational security. Marcus had even found a memo from 3 months ago, marked with Blackwood's personal seal authorizing enhanced containment protocols for legacy security concerns. Legacy security concerns, Rachel read aloud. That's what they're calling prisoners held for 30 years. Legacy concerns. Eddie leaned over her shoulder, squinting at the screen. That memo is dated the same week Frank Sullivan filed his police report. Blackwood knew Frank was getting close, so he ordered enhanced containment. Probably code for tightening security at Blackfish, making sure no one could get in or out. Marcus found something else. Miguel pulled up a new file, a personnel roster for a private military contractor called Sentinel Solutions Group. This is the company running security at Blackfish Station. Look at the board of directors. Rachel scanned the names and felt ice slide down her spine. 3 of them were retired generals. One was a former CIA director, and the chairman was Senator William Blackwood himself. He didn't just authorize the facility, he owned the company that operated it. He built himself a private prison, she whispered. A place where he could disappear anyone who threatened him, hold them indefinitely without oversight or accountability. All perfectly legal, because nobody knows it exists. There's more. Miguel opened another file, this one containing satellite imagery of the Nevada desert. Marcus pulled archived photos from commercial satellites going back 2 decades. Watch what happens when you sequence them. He played the images in rapid succession, showing the desert landscape changing over years. What started as empty wasteland gradually developed infrastructure roads, buildings, perimeter fencing. But the facility was designed to be nearly invisible from above, structures built into hillsides, everything painted in colors that matched the surrounding terrain. Only by comparing multiple years of imagery could you detect the gradual construction. That's Blackfish, Eddie confirmed. I've seen enough black sites to recognize the architecture. Underground detention areas to avoid thermal imaging, multiple redundant security perimeters, probably automated defenses. Getting in without an army would be impossible, Rachel finished. Which is why we're not going in. Not yet. Both men looked at her with surprise. Miguel spoke first. I thought the whole plan was to raid Blackfish, extract your father. That was the plan when I thought we were fighting bureaucrats and cover-ups. But Blackwood isn't just covering up old crimes, he's actively running an illegal detention facility right now while campaigning for president. This isn't about the past anymore. It's about stopping him from taking power. Rachel pulled up another screen, this one showing Blackwood's campaign schedule. He's announcing his presidential bid in 6 days at Arlington National Cemetery. Big media event, maximum symbolism, decorated war hero, announcing his campaign at the nation's most sacred military site. He'll give a speech about honor and sacrifice, probably invoke the memory of fallen soldiers while standing on their graves. Appropriate, since he's responsible for putting some of them there, Eddie muttered. That's where we hit him. Rachel's voice took on the focused intensity of mission planning. Not with bullets or bombs, but with truth. We expose Project Helios Blackfish Station everything. We do it on camera in front of the media in a place where he can't just make it disappear. Miguel was already shaking his head. Major Arlington is going to be locked down tighter than Fort Knox. Secret Service, Capitol Police, probably military security. They'll have counter-sniper teams, security sweeps, metal detectors at every entrance. How do we even get close? We don't try to sneak in. We walk through the front door. Rachel pulled up a different file, one showing Arlington's layout and security protocols. Arlington holds military funerals every day, dozens of them. Families, veterans groups, honor guards, all with legitimate reasons to be there. We pose as mourners attending a funeral, blend in with the crowds. And when Blackwood takes the stage, we make our move. And by make our move, you mean what exactly? Eddie asked. I stand up in front of every camera in America, and I tell them who I am. Major Rachel Morgan, daughter of Captain Jonathan Morgan, who was declared dead 34 years ago, but is actually a prisoner in an illegal facility run by the man currently asking Americans to make him president. I show them these. She held up the dog tag fragments. I tell them about Project Helios, about Task Force Quicksilver, about every soldier who died, to bury the truth. And I dare Blackwood to deny it on live television. The room went silent. Miguel and Eddie exchanged glances, both clearly trying to find a diplomatic way to say what they were thinking. That's insane, Miguel said finally. Even if you pull it off, even if you get in front of cameras before security tackles you, Blackwood will just deny everything. Say you're mentally unstable, traumatized from combat, making up conspiracy theories. By the time anyone investigates, you'll be in a cell next to your father. Unless we have proof they can't deny. Rachel pulled out the thumb drive Frank Sullivan had died protecting. This contains documentation, photographs, testimony. It's not complete, but combined with Marcus's files and our testimony, it's enough to force an investigation. Once the media starts digging, once congressional committees get involved, the truth becomes too big to bury. Eddie leaned back in his wheelchair, his expression thoughtful. It's a long shot. Hell, it's a desperate Hail Mary. But it might be the only shot we've got. Once Blackwood becomes president, he'll have the full power of the executive branch to protect himself. Now he's just a senator with secrets. Vulnerable, if we hit him right. We'd need more than just Rachel, Miguel said. One person stands up, she's a lone nut. Multiple people all telling the same story, all with evidence that's harder to dismiss. I can get more people. Eddie pulled out his phone, started scrolling through contacts. Veterans from Frank's network, researchers who've been tracking black sites, journalists who've been trying to expose military corruption for years. Give me 48 hours, I can put together a group that'll be impossible to ignore. Rachel felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Not quite hope, but close. A sense that maybe possibly they had a path forward that didn't end with everyone dead. We'll need to coordinate carefully. Anyone who helps us becomes a target. Blackwood's people have already shown they're willing to kill. Everyone I'm calling has been a target their whole lives, Eddie said quietly. They're veterans, whistleblowers, survivors. They know the risks. And they'll show up anyway because that's what you do when someone finally gives you a chance to fight back. Miguel had moved to another laptop, pulling up information about Arlington National Cemetery. If we're doing this, we need to scout the location, figure out security patterns, identify the best positions for making our statement plan extraction routes for when everything goes sideways. When, not if, Rachel noted. Major, the second you start talking, every security officer in Arlington is going to converge on your position. Secret Service doesn't take chances with potential threats to political figures. You'll have maybe 90 seconds before they drag you away, probably less. Then I need to make those 90 seconds count. Rachel pulled out a notebook, started writing. I need a speech, something short, punchy, impossible to edit into sound bites that lose the meaning. I need to name names, cite specific evidence, make allegations serious enough that the media has to follow up. I can help with that, Eddie offered. I've been thinking about what to say for 30 years if anyone ever gave me the chance. They worked through the morning and into the afternoon, building a plan that was equal parts strategy and prayer. Rachel would attend a military funeral, scheduled for the same afternoon, as Blackwood's announcement positioned, where she'd have clear sightlines to the media area. Eddie would coordinate with other veterans, positioning them throughout the ceremony as witnesses and backup. Miguel would handle technical support, recording equipment, encrypted communications, digital distribution of evidence in case they were arrested before going public. Marcus Webb sent another encrypted message at 1400 hours. Found something big. Prisoner transport logs from Blackfish. Your father moved to different facility 2 weeks ago. Location unknown. Blackwood's cleaning house before announcement. Rachel read the message 3 times, feeling her carefully constructed plan crumble. If her father wasn't at Blackfish anymore, if he'd been moved or killed. This doesn't change anything, Eddie said, reading over her shoulder. We still expose Blackwood, still force an investigation. They can't hide your father forever, not once Congress starts issuing subpoenas. Unless he's already dead. Then we make sure everyone knows why he died. We make sure his sacrifice means something. Eddie gripped her hand with surprising strength. Your father didn't hold out for 34 years just to see his daughter give up now. He held out because he believed someone would finish the mission. You're that someone, Rachel. You're his daughter, his legacy, his final operation. Don't let him down. Rachel stood, walked to the window, watched clouds gather over the mountains. Storm coming, the kind of weather that made flying dangerous and made soldiers grateful for solid roofs. She thought about her father, wherever he was, whether he knew his daughter had finally learned the truth, whether he'd given up hope, or whether some part of him still believed in the system he'd served. 6 days, she said, turning back to face Eddie and Miguel. We have 6 days to gather evidence, coordinate witnesses, plan an operation that has to work perfectly the first time because we won't get a second chance. 6 days to either save my father or avenge him. 6 days to change history, Miguel added. No pressure, Eddie said with a grim smile. Rachel's phone buzzed again, this time a news alert. She opened it, felt the blood drain from her face. Senator William Blackwood announces presidential campaign launch moved up to tomorrow morning. Surprise announcement at Arlington National Cemetery to honor fallen heroes. Media coverage begins 0900 hours. He knows, Rachel whispered. Somehow he knows we're planning something. He's forcing our hand, making us move before we're ready. Eddie wheeled over, read the alert, and cursed with impressive creativity. We're not ready. We don't have witnesses organized, don't have evidence packaged for distribution, don't have backup plans if the primary fails. Then we work all night. Rachel's voice hardened with determination. We improvise, we adapt, we overcome. Those are the first 3 rules of Ranger operations, and they've kept me alive through worse situations than this. This is suicide, Miguel said flatly. Going in unprepared against that level of security with 1 day's notice. Everything about this mission has been suicide from the start. Rachel interrupted. "The difference is now we know it going in. Now we choose it anyway." She pulled out the dog tag fragments, held them up to catch the afternoon light. "My father made his choice 34 years ago. Frank Sullivan made his choice when he kept searching for truth. Sarah Chen and the others made their choice when they stood their ground at the meeting point. Now it's our turn." She looked at Eddie, and Miguel saw them wrestling with the same calculation she'd already made, the probability of success versus the cost of failure, the value of truth versus the price of silence. "I'm not ordering anyone to follow me," Rachel said quietly. "This is volunteer only, and I'll think no less of anyone who walks away. But I'm going to Arlington tomorrow. I'm going to stand in front of those cameras, and I'm going to tell the world exactly what Senator William Blackwood really is, even if it's the last thing I do." Eddie and Miguel looked at each other, some wordless communication passing between them. Then Eddie nodded slowly, and Miguel sighed the sigh of a man who'd just accepted his fate. "Guess we're going to Washington," Miguel said. "Guess we are," Eddie agreed. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Marcus sent encrypted files that Rachel downloaded to multiple USB drives, each one containing evidence of Project Helios. Eddie made phone calls to veterans across the country, mobilizing a network of witnesses who'd drop everything to stand with them. Miguel acquired equipment cameras, recording devices, even a portable transmitter that could broadcast directly to news stations if they got jammed before going public. Night fell over the White Mountains, and Rachel found herself back on the porch, too wired to sleep despite 20 hours awake. Tomorrow, she would either expose the greatest military conspiracy in American history, or she'd disappear into the same black hole that had swallowed her father. Either way, the silence would finally end. Eddie joined her in the darkness, his wheelchair creaking against the old boards. For a while, neither of them spoke, just two soldiers watching their last peaceful night before battle. "Your father would be proud," Eddie said finally. "Terrified, but proud. Did he ever talk about me in those hours before everything went to hell?" "Every chance he got. Showed us pictures of you, told stories about teaching you to walk, about how you'd grab his dog tags and refuse to let go." Eddie smiled at the memory. "He said you were stubborn as hell, that when you decided something, nothing could change your mind. Said you'd either be a soldier or a revolutionary, and he couldn't decide which scared him more." Rachel touched the dog tag fragments in her pocket. "Turns out I'm both." "Yeah, turns out you are." They sat in comfortable silence as stars emerged overhead. The same stars her father had seen from Iraqi deserts. The same stars that had witnessed every truth and lie and secret in human history. Tomorrow, Rachel thought, we add one more truth to their catalog. One more small act of defiance against the darkness. She just hoped it would be enough. Dawn would come too soon, and with it, the battle that would determine whether 34 years of silence ended with justice, or with more graves. Rachel didn't pray she'd lost that habit somewhere between Kandahar and Raqqa, but she made a promise to the night, to her father, to every soldier who'd ever trusted that the truth mattered. Tomorrow, at Arlington National Cemetery, surrounded by the honored dead Major Rachel Morgan, would keep the promise her father had made 34 years ago. She would tell the truth, no matter the cost. And if Senator William Blackwood wanted to silence her, he'd have to do it in front of the entire world. Arlington National Cemetery wore its dignity like a dress uniform, every white headstone standing at perfect attention across rolling hills that held more American history than any museum could contain. Rachel had been to military funerals before, too many of them, for soldiers who'd served under her command. But she'd never felt the weight of this place quite like she did now, knowing that in less than an hour, she would either honor its purpose or desecrate it with the kind of truth that shattered comfortable lies. The morning air carried the crisp bite of early April cherry blossoms, drifting like snow across manicured lawns where the nation's heroes slept. News vans lined the access roads, satellite dishes pointed skyward, reporters checking makeup and microphones while camera operators tested angles. Security was everywhere. Capitol Police in tactical gear, Secret Service agents with earpieces and stone faces, military police coordinating perimeter sweeps. They'd turned Arlington into a fortress, all to protect a man who'd built his career on the graves of people he'd murdered. Rachel stood among a group of mourners gathered for a funeral service at Section 60, where recent casualties from Iraq and Afghanistan were buried. She wore her dress uniform, the same one she'd worn to her mother's funeral, pressed and perfect medals aligned with regulation precision. To any observer, she was just another officer paying respects to a fallen comrade. Only the slight bulge under her jacket where she'd concealed 2 USB drives containing evidence of Project Helios suggested anything unusual. Miguel stood 30 yards away, dressed in a suit that made him look like a bereaved family member, a camera disguised as a cell phone in his hand. Eddie had positioned himself near the media area, his wheelchair and obvious injuries making him invisible to security, just another wounded veteran come to honor the dead. Around the cemetery, scattered among legitimate mourners, Eddie had placed 11 more veterans from Frank Sullivan's network. Each one carried copies of the evidence, each one prepared to speak if Rachel was silenced. "Heads up!" Miguel's voice crackled through the nearly invisible earpiece Rachel wore. "Blackwood's motorcade just entered the cemetery. ETA to announcement stage 5 minutes. Rachel's heart hammered against her ribs, her body flooding with the familiar cocktail of adrenaline and focus that preceded combat. Except this time she wasn't facing enemy soldiers across a desert battlefield. She was facing the full apparatus of American power, wielded by a man who'd spent 34 years perfecting the art of making inconvenient people disappear. The funeral service concluded, the honor guard folding the flag with ceremonial precision, the widow clutching it to her chest while tears carved tracks through her makeup. Rachel felt a pang of guilt for using this moment, this family's grief, as cover for her operation. But the soldier being buried today had died in Afghanistan, in a war built partly on lies told by people like Blackwood. Maybe exposing those lies was the best way to honor his sacrifice. "Major Morgan," a quiet voice said behind her. Rachel turned to find a woman in her 60s, gray hair pulled back severely, wearing a black dress and carrying herself with the rigid posture of someone who'd spent decades in military service. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and carried a wariness that suggested she knew exactly who Rachel was. "Dr. Eleanor Reed," the woman said, extending a hand. "Eddie Thompson called me last night, said you might need someone who could verify the science behind Project Helios." Rachel shook her hand carefully, noting the tremor in Reed's fingers. Not fear, but age, maybe illness. "You worked on the project." "I was a biochemist at Fort Detrick in the 80s, seconded to a classified research program I didn't fully understand until it was too late. By the time I realized what we were actually doing, I was in too deep to walk away without destroying my career. So I made a choice I've regretted for 30 years. Reed's voice carried the weight of old shame. "I kept silent, took my pension, and tried to forget. But Eddie said you were finally going to expose it. Said you were Jonathan Morgan's daughter. You knew my father." I met him once briefly after his team raided the facility. He was different from other soldiers I'd encountered, thoughtful, moral, genuinely horrified by what he'd discovered. He asked me questions I couldn't answer about how we justified the research, how we lived with ourselves. I had no good answers then. I still don't. Reed reached into her purse, pulled out a yellowed document. "This is my original research assignment, signed by then Colonel William Blackwood. It proves he had direct oversight of Project Helios from the beginning. I should have released it years ago, but I was afraid. Now I'm dying of pancreatic cancer and fear seems less important than truth. Rachel took the document with hands that wanted to shake but didn't, because Rangers didn't shake even when their entire world was reshaping itself. Thank you. This changes everything. Don't thank me yet. What you're about to do confronting Blackwood publicly, he'll destroy you for it. He's got resources, connections, the ability to make truth look like lies and lies look like truth. You need to be prepared for that. I've been preparing my whole life, Rachel said quietly. I just didn't know it until now. Reed studied her face, and something in her expression softened. You look like him, you know. Your father. Same eyes, same stubborn set to your jaw. He was one of the good ones, Major. Make sure his story gets told right. Before Rachel could respond, a commotion rippled through the crowd. Senator William Blackwood had arrived emerging from an armored SUV with the easy confidence of someone who believed himself untouchable. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, an American flag pin on his lapel, and a smile that had been focus grouped to convey gravitas and warmth in equal measure. The cameras loved him immediately, lenses tracking his movement, as he walked toward the hastily constructed stage near the tomb of the unknown soldier. Rachel watched him glad hand supporters embrace veterans pose for photographs with Gold Star families. He was good at this, the performance of carrying the theater of patriotism. She could see why Americans wanted to believe in him, wanted to trust that a decorated war hero would lead them with honor and integrity. They had no idea they were cheering for a mass murderer. All units target acquired, Miguel's voice said in her ear. Major, you're on in approximately 3 minutes. Security is tight but manageable. We've identified your approach vector west side of the crowd, near the camera riser. You'll have about 60 seconds of clear sightline before Secret Service responds. 60 seconds. Rachel had toppled governments in less time, but those had been foreign governments without the resources and legal authority of the United States backing them. Still, 60 seconds was enough to speak a truth that couldn't be unspoken to light a fire that couldn't be extinguished. She started moving through the crowd, angling toward the camera riser, her movements casual enough not to trigger security algorithms that watched for aggressive approach patterns. Other veterans from Eddie's network shifted position too, creating a human perimeter that would buy her precious seconds when security finally reacted. Blackwood took the stage, gripping the podium with both hands, his expression solemn as he surveyed the assembled crowd. Behind him, Arlington's endless rows of white headstones stretched to the horizon, a visual reminder of sacrifice that he was about to cynically exploit. My fellow Americans, Blackwood began his voice, carrying the practiced resonance of someone who'd given 1,000 speeches. I stand before you today in this sacred place among heroes who gave everything for the ideals we hold dear. It is their sacrifice, their courage, their unwavering commitment to duty that inspires me to announce my candidacy for President of the United States. Applause erupted. Cameras flashed. Reporters leaned forward, already composing their opening paragraphs. Rachel kept moving 20 feet from the camera riser, now her hand drifting to the USB drives in her jacket. Throughout my military career, I learned that leadership means making hard choices, protecting those who cannot protect themselves, and never compromising on the values that make America exceptional. Rachel felt bile rise in her throat. The sheer audacity of the lie delivered in a cemetery filled with soldiers who'd died believing in those same values was almost too much to bear. Which is why I come before you today with a promise, liar. Rachel's voice cut through Blackwood's speech like a knife, loud enough to be heard, but not yet shouted. Heads turned, cameras pivoted. Blackwood paused mid-sentence, his eyes finding Rachel in the crowd. Recognition flickered across his face, not of her specifically, but of the type of threat she represented. Someone who shouldn't be here, who wasn't part of the choreographed event, who represented chaos in a carefully controlled environment. "Liar!" Rachel repeated louder now, pushing forward through the crowd as security started to react. "Senator Blackwood, you're a liar and a war criminal, and I can prove it." Secret Service agents were moving, closing in from multiple angles, but Eddie's veterans positioned themselves in their path, not aggressively, but firmly creating obstacles that bought Rachel precious seconds. She reached the camera riser, climbed up before anyone could stop her, and suddenly she was standing above the crowd, every camera in America pointed in her direction. "My name is Major Rachel Morgan, United States Army Rangers." Her voice carried across the cemetery, with the command presence that had led soldiers through firefights. "I'm the daughter of Captain Jonathan Morgan, who Senator Blackwood declared dead in 1991 to cover up war crimes committed under his command." Blackwood's face had gone pale, then red anger breaking through his carefully maintained composure. "Security, remove this woman immediately. I'm not finished." Rachel pulled out the USB drives, held them high. On these drives is evidence of Project Helios, an illegal bioweapons program run by then-Colonel Blackwood during Desert Storm. Evidence of human experimentation on prisoners of war crimes covered up for 34 years of American soldiers murdered to protect these secrets. She could see Secret Service agents pushing through the crowd, now 20 feet away and closing fast. Eddie had wheeled his chair into their path, and Rachel saw other veterans doing the same, creating a human barrier that wouldn't hold long, but might hold long enough. Captain Jonathan Morgan discovered Project Helios in February 1991. Rachel continued, her voice rising with urgency as security closed in. Instead of allowing him to expose these crimes, Senator Blackwood had him declared KIA and imprisoned in an illegal black site called Blackfish Station. "My father has been held prisoner for 34 years, without charges, without trial, without anyone even knowing he's alive, all to protect this man's political career." The crowd had gone silent, shocked into stillness by the accusations. Reporters were frantically typing cameras, recording every word. Blackwood stood frozen at the podium, his carefully crafted image crumbling in real time. "Major Morgan suffers from PTSD, Blackwood said, suddenly, his voice carrying the smooth certainty of someone deploying a prepared defense. "She's been under tremendous stress following a recent incident in Boston. These accusations are delusional, the product of a troubled mind." Then explain this. Dr. Eleanor Reed had climbed onto the stage, moving with surprising speed for someone her age, and she thrust the yellowed document at the nearest camera. "This is my original research assignment from 1989, personally signed by Colonel William Blackwood, authorizing my work on Project Helios. It proves he had direct oversight of illegal bioweapons research." "And this," Eddie called out from his wheelchair, holding up his dog tag fragment. "Piece of Captain Morgan's identification cut and distributed among Task Force Quicksilver survivors as insurance. 7 pieces, 7 soldiers. They killed 6 of us to recover them. I'm the last one left, and I'm done being silent." Around the cemetery, other veterans were standing up, each one holding evidence, each one adding their voice to the chorus. They'd planned for this, anticipated that Blackwood would try to dismiss Rachel as unstable, prepared multiple witnesses who couldn't all be discredited. "My name is Dr. Eleanor Reed, and I worked on Project Helios. I can testify to everything Major Morgan said. Staff Sergeant James Martinez, Army Intelligence. I helped bury files related to Task Force Quicksilver under orders from Colonel Blackwood's office. Lieutenant Commander Patricia Walsh, Navy Medical Corps. I treated prisoners who were subjected to biological experiments in 1991. More voices, more witnesses, an avalanche of truth that couldn't be stopped. Rachel saw panic flash across Blackwood's face, the look of someone who'd spent decades building an impregnable fortress of lies only to watch it collapse in 60 seconds. The Secret Service reached Rachel, finally strong hands gripping her arms, preparing to drag her away. But she'd done what she came to do. The truth was out-recorded by dozens of cameras, witnessed by hundreds of people, impossible to bury or deny or explain away. "You held my father prisoner for 34 years, Rachel said, her voice carrying over the chaos aimed directly at Blackwood like a weapon. "You murdered soldiers who served this country honorably. You built a career on corpses and called it patriotism. And now, Senator, the whole world knows exactly what you are." Blackwood opened his mouth, searching for words that could salvage the moment, but there were none. The damage was done. The fire lit the truth, unleashed in a place where lies couldn't survive the scrutiny of history. Rachel didn't resist, as security dragged her off the stage. She'd accomplished her mission, delivered the message her father had been waiting 34 years to send. Whatever happened next, arrest, prosecution, even assassination, the conspiracy was exposed. The silence broken the truth, finally free to do its work. The next hours blurred together in a chaos of handcuffs and interrogation rooms, lawyers appearing from nowhere, federal agents demanding answers while threatening charges Rachel couldn't even name. But the story had already escaped their control, spreading across social media and news networks faster than any damage control team could contain. Within 2 hours, watch Project Helios was trending worldwide. Within 4 hours, 3 members of Congress were calling for immediate investigations. Within 6 hours, Senator William Blackwood's presidential campaign had suspended operations pending clarification of these serious allegations. Rachel sat in a holding cell at a federal facility outside Washington, her dress uniform rumpled and torn, her wrists bruised from handcuffs, her body exhausted, but her mind crystal clear. They'd taken everything: her phone, her uniform jacket, even the dog tag fragments she'd carried like talismans. But they couldn't take what mattered most. The truth was out. The fire was lit. And fires like this one didn't go out just because powerful people wanted them to. A guard opened the cell door. "You have a visitor. Says it's urgent." Rachel expected a lawyer or maybe FBI. Instead, a man in his 70s entered wearing civilian clothes but moving with military bearing. His face was weathered, scarred, thinner than the photographs suggested. But Rachel recognized him instantly from the picture Eddie had shown her, from the eyes that matched her own reflection. Captain Jonathan Morgan stood in the doorway of her cell, alive and real and impossible. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Rachel felt tears burning behind her eyes, emotions she'd buried for 34 years, suddenly overwhelming every defense she'd built. This was her father. Not a memory or a photograph or a story, but an actual person who'd lived and suffered and survived. "Rachel," he said, his voice rough with disuse and emotion. "My Rachel. Look at you. You're all grown up. You're a soldier." "I'm your daughter," she whispered the words, catching in her throat. "They told me you were dead." "I was. For 34 years I was dead." He moved closer, hesitant, as if afraid she might disappear like a dream. "But I heard you. In that cell, in that darkness, I heard your voice on television telling the world what they'd done, telling the truth I'd spent my whole life trying to expose, and suddenly I wasn't dead anymore." "How did they release you?" "They didn't have a choice. Once you went public, once the media started demanding proof I was dead, they couldn't keep hiding me. It was release me or face questions about why they'd imprisoned an American soldier without trial for 3 decades. Jonathan's laugh was bitter. "Turns out sunlight is the best disinfectant. You brought the sunlight, sweetheart." Rachel stood crossed the cell in 3 steps and threw her arms around her father. He was too thin, fragile, in a way that spoke of years of deprivation and suffering, but he was alive and warm and real. They held each other while Rachel cried, not the controlled, disciplined tears of a soldier, but the raw, desperate sobbing of a daughter who'd just gotten back something she'd never known she'd lost. "I'm sorry," Jonathan whispered into her hair. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there. That I missed your childhood, your graduation, everything. That your mother had to raise you alone while I was—" "Stop!" Rachel pulled back, looked him in the eyes. "You were exactly where you needed to be. You held the line, Dad. For 34 years you held the line and refused to break. You gave me something more important than childhood memories. You gave me proof that the truth matters, that honor means something, that some fights are worth any sacrifice." They talked for hours, guards periodically checking but not interrupting as father and daughter filled in 34 years of absence. Jonathan told her about his imprisonment, the isolation, the interrogations, the years of darkness punctuated only by the hope that someday, somehow, the truth would emerge. Rachel told him about her life, about following in his footsteps to become a ranger, about Syria and Boston, and the chain of events that had led her to this moment. "Your mother," Jonathan said quietly. "Eddie told me she passed. The cancer. Last year. She never stopped believing you were a hero. Even when they told her you were dead, she knew you'd died for something that mattered. She deserved better than me. Better than a husband who chose duty over family." Rachel gripped his hand fiercely. "She chose you knowing exactly who you were. She was proud of you, Dad. And she'd be proud of what we did today." Through the cell's small window, Rachel could see the sun setting over Washington, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. The news would be carrying updates now, Blackwood's resignation from the Senate FBI raids on Blackfish Station congressional hearings, scheduled indictments pending. The machinery of justice was slow and imperfect, but it was finally moving in the right direction. A female FBI agent appeared at the cell door, her expression professionally neutral. "Major Morgan, you're being released. All charges dropped. Someone very high up the chain made it clear that prosecuting you would be politically untenable given the circumstances." Rachel stood, helped her father to his feet. "What about him?" "Captain Morgan is free to go as well, with the government's apologies and assurances that reparations will be discussed." The agent's tone suggested she personally found those assurances insufficient, but wasn't in a position to say so. "There's a crowd of reporters outside. I can arrange a back exit if you prefer." Rachel looked at her father, saw him straighten his shoulders, saw the soldier emerge from beneath the prisoner. "No," she said. "We'll take the front door. We've been silent long enough." They walked out together, father and daughter, 2 soldiers who'd fought the same war across 34 years. The reporters surged forward, cameras flashing questions shouted in a cacophony that would have been overwhelming if Rachel hadn't spent the last week learning to stand firm in the face of chaos. "Major Morgan, do you feel vindicated?" "Captain Morgan, what do you want to say to Senator Blackwood? Is it true Blackwood is facing war crimes charges?" Rachel raised her hand, and the crowd quieted, waiting. She thought about Luigi's restaurant, about Frank Sullivan dying in her arms, about the veterans who'd stood with her at Arlington. She thought about her mother, who'd raised a daughter alone while grieving a husband who wasn't actually dead. She thought about Eddie and Sarah and all the others who'd risked everything for truth. "Justice delayed is not justice denied," Rachel said, her voice carrying across the crowd. "It took 34 years, but today the truth finally found the light. Senator Blackwood will face the consequences of his crimes. The soldiers he murdered will be honored properly. The conspiracy he built will be dismantled piece by piece. And most importantly, my father, Captain Jonathan Morgan, a true American hero, is finally home." Jonathan squeezed her hand, and Rachel saw tears streaming down his weathered face. "The truth always finds the light," he said softly. "It just took a stubborn daughter to help it along." They walked down the federal building's steps together into a future neither of them could predict, but both of them had fought to reach. Somewhere in America, in congressional offices and newsrooms and military barracks, people were having conversations that would reshape how the nation understood its own history, its own capacity for evil and for redemption. Rachel Morgan had walked into a Boston restaurant 3 days ago, just wanting linguine and peace. She'd walked out a warrior in a war she didn't know she'd been drafted for, carrying a conspiracy that had been buried for longer than she'd been alive. Now that war was won, not with bullets or bombs, but with the only weapon that had ever really mattered, the truth, spoken clearly and courageously in a place where lies couldn't hide. Her father was home. The guilty would face justice. The dead would be honored. And Rachel Morgan, the quiet woman who'd demolished 3 armed men in 15 seconds, had proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon in any arsenal was simply the courage to stand up and say what everyone else was too afraid to speak aloud. The truth always finds the light, but sometimes it needs a soldier to lead the way.